Live from the capital city, Georgetown. Political, legislative, economics, and current affairs. The People's National Congress Reform, PNCR, presents Nation Watch.
Good day to you, Guyana, and welcome to Nation Watch for today, Sunday, the 9th of November 2014. I am Malika Ramsey. Thank you very much for joining us today. On today's program, we have lots to get to, but before we get to so much that we have to get to, I just want to urge those of you who are currently in the city just to be careful, especially if you're driving, because it's a wet one in the capital today. On today's program, we are focusing on the fact that the first sitting of Parliament will be held. The first sitting since the recess period was completed. The first sitting will be held tomorrow. That is Monday, the 10th of November, 2014. Of course, this comes after an announcement and address to the nation by the head of state, President Donald Ramotar, last Tuesday, which would have been the 4th of November. To discuss this and other parliamentary matters with me today is the Deputy Speaker of the National Assembly. He wears several hats. He's also the Shadow Attorney General, which also makes him the Shadow Legal Affairs Minister and the Chairman of the People's National Congress Reform. Welcome to you, Mr. Basil Williams.
Thank you, Malika.
All right.
Good day, viewers.
All right. Good to have you. Let's get right into it. The first problem we're seeing coming out of the announcement that there will be a sitting of the National Assembly tomorrow, that's Monday the 10th of November, is the fact that a Partnership for National Unity, of course, and other members of the opposition would have come out and said that, look, the president does not have the constitutional power to call sitting of the House. Mr. Shearer, who is one of the advisors in the PPPC and, of course, a member of Parliament, in the past few hours has been quoted as saying that, look, the opposition is just it's just a storm in a teacup. Why are you saying that the president doesn't have the constitutional right to call a sitting of the National Assembly? Your thoughts on that, sir?
Well, that's correct. The president doesn't have that power under the Constitution to call any sitting of Parliament. You should recall, too, that this is not the first time that the PPP is trying to breach the rules of Parliament, because when Parliament had been adjourned some months ago to a specific date, and then we got a letter under the hand of the Prime Minister purporting to tell us that that date is no longer the relevant date. He's going to bring forward the date, that he's going to push it back beyond that date. In other words, they were trying to delay the Parliament because they had the issues of certain bills coming up in the Parliament. And we had none of that, and we refused. We told our MPs to come in for the sit-in, and they did. And the next day when we went to Parliament, the PPP turned up also, because they knew they were bluffing, and we called their bluff, and we turned up, and so they had to turn up. One would have believed that it was a regular turning up that day for the meeting of Parliament, sitting of Parliament, until we told them the attempt that was made by the PPP to subvert that date and push it back. So this is not unusual. The president comes out again, purporting to announce the date for the sitting of Parliament after the recess. He doesn't have the authority to do that. In fact, the person who ought to have done that is the leader of the government's business in the Parliament, which is the Prime Minister.
Okay, all right. Viewers, I should also let you know that we'll be taking some of your calls a little later on in the program, of course, because you have a lot of questions regarding what really will happen during tomorrow's sitting. The number, you can write it down, 223-5192, and we'll open the phone lines in a bit to talk to you and to hear your questions and your concerns. Now, Mr. Williams, the main thing probably coming out of the president's address last Tuesday would have been the fact that he said that if the opposition decides to go ahead with this no confidence motion by the Alliance for Change, that he will either dissolve or prorogue the House. Now, prorogue is basically, it's not new to the Constitution, but it's new to the public at large, because we didn't even hear about this before. Before you even talk about if you believe that the president will make good on his threat, just explain to the viewers, what really does proroguing the National Assembly mean?
Well, there are two provisions. One is to dissolve it, and those are under Article 70 and or prorogue it. There's another provision in Article 106.6, and that's a no confidence motion. where if they lose a vote of confidence, then the parliament is deemed to be dissolved also. You must remember, we should not let viewers forget that the no confidence motion came about, and after it was announced that the AFC was going forward with this motion and that the APNU would support it, the PPP said that they had an option to dissolve the parliament. Now, why I'm making this point is to reinforce the view that people were talking about new elections, fresh elections. That is, people should go to get a new mandate because the government was breaching all the rules. Even though we disapproved of certain spending, the Minister of Finance and other ministers continued to spend on those items. And there were other intromissions. The entire attitude of this government since 2011 was really not to conform with the norms of Parliament. And so we all thought, okay, elections are in the air. But lo and behold now, since that last broadcast by the President, he has added this other dimension of prorogation of the Parliament. Now, prorogation of the Parliament is provided by the Constitution. It's essentially a suspension of the Parliament, and it can't be for more than a period of 6 months. And during this period of suspension, a specific date obviously has to be named for when the Parliament will resume. But during this period of suspension, Parliament is in abeyance. There is no Parliament, but the government remains. And the government could continue purporting to govern the country without the Parliament. In other words, we expect that they would want to continue spending money that they have been doing even in the light of a parliamentary decision that they shouldn't spend. But in other words, what they would be doing is purporting to conduct the business of government outside of the scrutiny of the Parliament. So one could imagine that the majority of people in this country who are represented by the opposition benches, their interests would not be in the forefront of the government's mind. They would not be in a position to scrutinize any decisions of the government, certainly in relation of the spending of the taxpayers' monies. So this is basically a three-card trick in the whole structure of what people had been expecting. But what it conveys clearly is that it confirms that the government is afraid to face the people of Guyana at another election.
Let me stay on this for a bit. Are you saying, just to make it clear, the public, we are accustomed to having our national budget read between the months of February and April of each year. Of course, if the president prorogates the parliament, that will take us past that period. So are you saying that there will be no reading of a budget, no approvals, no disapprovals, no nothing?
Well, only the devil knows what's in the PPP's mind. It's what I'm saying to you, they could suspend. They cannot suspend for more than 6 months. So it's up to them if they want to suspend. The question is, though, when they suspend, they alone are going to be making decisions for the Guyanese people. But you must remember, they are a minority government. So what they are essentially doing is shutting out the majority of the Guyanese people from taking part in relevant decisions for the governance of this country.
There are already sentiments floating around out there to the question of, didn't David Granger, didn't Basil Williams, didn't a Partnership for National Unity see a move like this coming, and couldn't you have done something to prevent it?
No, look, as a lawyer, I know that they have those options. Okay. But one would expect that with all the talk that they were giving us, that they too were ready for elections. We were not, it's only now I'm convinced that they are actually afraid to go to the polls again. They're afraid of the Guyanese people voting them out of office. And so they are desperate, and so from desperate people, you could expect desperate measures. It's not that we didn't know. Obviously, we knew that provision was there. There was a prorogation before. I think it might have been in the 8th and the 9th Parliament. When you recall, we had to go to Parliament was removed from the Parliament buildings, and it went to Ocean View Hotel. That was a prorogation there, and After that period is finished, it resumed at the Parliament building. But that was something that all parties in the Parliament had agreed to. This is this current one now, if the President were to prorogue Parliament, it really cuts against the whole grain and thrust of the issues that have been governing the debate within the last 7 months. And that is that both sides were prepared to go back to the people for a fresh mandate. We, in particular in the opposition, we believe that we couldn't continue to countenance the kind of spending of the taxpayers' money by the government without scrutiny and or without permission. And so there are other things too that the government has been doing. The big projects that they have, they weren't giving us enough information on those projects. Up to now, you have a lot of the taxpayers' money not into the government account, but it's outside of the government's account, which means that they have a large amount of money that they are spending beyond the scrutiny of the Parliament. So all these things that they're doing, they still have the employees and the workers of this country living on starvation wages, and they're squandering the people's money. So how could we continue to go on with that?
Deputy Speaker Williams, initially, general elections would have been constitutionally due in 2016. Of course, this would have been before we started hearing talks about the APNU's call for local government elections and AFC's push of this no confidence motion. Do you see this sort of scenario that is playing out currently, whether something new comes up tomorrow or not? Do you see this playing out and stretching out as long as 2016? Is that the intention of the PPPC?
Well, the PPP could have its intention. In the final analysis is what they could only do what the people allow them to do. I think I saw a report from the leader of the opposition that a move like prorogation could make the people more angry. So whatever the PPP does depends on how the people are prepared to accept that. And obviously the people acting through their leaders. So we don't know what they want to do. They could equally come and dissolve it instead of proroguing it. And a dissolution could be acceptable because elections would have to be held within 3 months. But a prorogation is wholly unacceptable because we cannot countenance a situation where they shut us out in the Parliament, but they continue to purport to run the government, run the country, spend our money without scrutiny.
Okay. At this, some people will call it the 9th hour, the 10th hour. Do you believe that there's still room for some sort of negotiating and talking? Because, if I'm to pull the speaker, of course, speaker in on this, the Honorable Raphael Trotman, he has this style sometimes of, trying to get both sides of the house to compromise on various matters. Do you believe that we can see something like that happening tomorrow, whereby the opposition and the government sits down and try to decide on a different way forward? Is that possible?
Well, look, don't forget the APNU campaign on a platform of national unity. We're the only party that has been calling for national unity and a government of national unity. Up to now, there's been no effort on the part of the PPP to meet us, not even halfway on that point. I was saying we could have constituted a committee comprising of all the members of the Parliament to look at this question. During this period from 2011, the reporting period from 2011, that is the beginning of the 10th Parliament to now, a lot of other committees were constituted, but none to deal with the question of national unity. And so I don't know, even at this late hour, they had many opportunities to sit and talk with us. In fact, one of the things that you would note is that they cannot accuse Mr. Granger of not trying to enter into dialogue with them. On many occasions, if the president requests him to have dialogue with him, he would turn up. And what we're saying is that we've always been engaging and prepared to engage the government. And so I don't know so many opportunities. Look, I was there in the last engagement, and we went there hopefully. And to me, I saw the same old PPP. And I don't know what last-minute arrangements that you could expect expect in terms of discussions with the government and the opposition members of parliament. Um, on the one hand, there is a motion of no confidence. If it's successful, it eventuates in a dissolution of the parliament and elections within 3 months. The president says that they're not willing to suffer that consequence. They prefer to, in the first instance, for months now, they were saying they should dissolve it first by calling snap elections, if people would be called that. But now they're adding that they could prorogue it, that is suspend it. The most they could suspend it for 6 months, and then they come back after the 6 months. And people are saying, I saw Nandala saying that they won't keep doing that until 2016. But I don't know if they could even do it for 6 months. I don't think the mood of the people is to allow this government to alone operate and make decisions about governing this country and spending the people's money by themselves.
You touched on something just now, and you even talked about it before, dissolving of parliament, that they did initially say that they have that choice. They can dissolve the parliament without having this no confidence motion by AFC debated. But months ago, we heard Dr. Luncheon, the head of the Presidential Secretariat, of course, I'm not quoting him exactly, saying that, look, the PPPC would not necessarily do that, that his government needs an opportunity in the parliament to defend its government record. Why do you think that position has changed?
Because what is the record of the PPP? It's not a good one. So I don't think they're prepared for it to be debated and the opposition to outline and put on the Hansard all of the intromissions of the PPP during this reporting period of this parliament. They're scared of that. And so they want to take the coward's way out. They don't want to go to the polls, and so they fall back on prorogation. Now, you must remember, when they resume, there are several schools of thought on this matter. The business that is currently before the parliament, after upon a prorogation, ipso facto, is cleaned. It no longer exists. So on the resumption, the contention is that you will now have to restart any process that you have in relation to any bills or any motions, for example, in the motion of no confidence, right? So all these things are factored in this prorogation situation. And so we are watching it, and we will have to, we don't want to obviously telegraph what we would do, but we understand all the angles right now. If the government wishes to talk, it really would be at the 11th hour that they want to talk. And of course, if they want to talk meaningfully on this issue, I'm not sure that we would be averse to it. As I said, we have always been prepared to engage them. But we've been engaging them, and I can't point to anything much that has borne fruit coming out from any of those engagements over the period.
Okay. Viewers, if you're now joining us, of course, this is Nation Watch, of course, Nation Watch Live, and I am here with Deputy Speaker and Shadow Attorney General and Shadow Minister of Legal Affairs, who's also the Chairman of the People's National Congress Reform, Mr. Basil. Of course, we're discussing parliamentary matters in light of the fact that there will be a first sitting of the National Assembly since the completion of recess tomorrow, Monday, the 10th of November. Of course, I'll be taking your calls a little later on in the program. In a few minutes, actually, you can call us on 223-5192 and pose your questions, your concerns, and possible suggestions to Mr. Williams. Now, Mr. Williams, your partnership has also continued to call for the holding of local government elections. If there is this prorogation of Parliament, the President, in his address last Tuesday, said that he's, again, another commitment from the President, that he will have the local government elections held by the second quarter of 2015. If there is a prorogation of Parliament, can the President still be held to that part of the announcement?
Malaika, doesn't that sound familiar to you, where local government elections are concerned? Last year, didn't you hear the same thing by April this year? And the year before, both Gango Prasad did it. And then when he left, Norman Whitaker has said, by April, every year they keep promising. Promises are comfort to a fool. Would you rely on what the President said? The President is trying to soften the impact of a prorogation by trying to hold out the possibility of local government elections. But do you trust him? Do you trust the PPP on this? So these are issues that we'll have to cogitate upon, and we'll have to determine the way forward if in fact the government is bold enough to go via the route of prorogation. Really, to me, that for them to do something like that, notwithstanding that the Constitution has that provision, it would be a betrayal of the Guyanese people. It would be a betrayal of the majority of the Guyanese people who voted at the last elections and voted in large measure for the opposition and to have their issues ventilated. But when you shut them out by proroguing Parliament so that their voices cannot be heard through their legally accredited representatives in the House, then basically it's a dictatorial rule you'll be having.
But
Dictatorial rule.
But how would you be able to, or I should say, would you be able to convince your supporters, all those persons, all of us who voted a Partnership for National Unity, that look, this is the way it works, this is the Constitution. It doesn't mean that the Partnership for National Unity has let its supporters or the nation as a whole down. How do you convince them that you haven't done that?
But we can't. We haven't let them down. You must remember, it's a minority government doing this. The majority of the people didn't vote for them. So they are really subverting the wishes of the majority. But I'm saying they're now entering into the realm of dictatorship. So that if they are seeking to have one party rule, really and truly, when you think of this thing, it would be one party rule of Guyana. And one shouldn't be surprised where this one party rule would be coming from. It is coming from the bosom of a Marxist-Leninist government. So do not be surprised that that's their ambition, that they alone should run Guyana. But the people don't want that. And it would be worse to them if they were to go that route and then go to a general elections. The people then would speak, and I expect the people would speak resoundingly against them. But we are saying the no confidence motion ought to be allowed if the government feels that they have a good case on the motion and they could persuade people on the motion and they could win it, fair enough. But if they can't win it, then they have to let the law take its course and let the dissolution go ahead. If they feel that they cannot sustain such a blow, let them go ahead and dissolve it too. But this prorogation that they wish to, as I said to you, they're contemplating or putting out there, it's basically one party rule. They would be trying to rule Guyana alone for at least the next 6 months at most.
All right. MP Williams, before we have to take a quick break and then start to take some of those calls, I can't possibly have you on a panel and not ask you about the recent Attorney General's tape scandal. Now, this, if I'm to link it to this whole business of either dissolving or prorogating the Parliament, do you believe that this move is also a move by the President to, in a sense, hide some of the flaws of his ministers? Because you've called for the removal of Minister Rohi because of the state of the security sector. Several ministers have been deviant. You had the complete lawless behavior by the current Minister of Education, Ms. Manikchan. Of course, this is not the first incident with her. Now, we're seeing the situation with Mr. Nandalal, and so far nothing has been done, even though things came out where people's lives have been threatened.
You're missing the Minister of Finance.
And yes, I'm
he
sorry.
He has flouted a decision of Parliament.
Illegally spent monies. Is the President doing all of this to somehow cover up the flaws of his ministers?
I don't know if he's doing that. You must remember this government is a government that dares you to succeed in removing their ministers in many instances for serious matters, serious infringements. You would recall even the case of Minister Gajraj, when he too had a tape, and on his watch, there were a lot of extrajudicial killings, and we called for his removal, and the government of the president never removed him. It was not until the type of protests that were undertaken against that minister, that he himself went to President Jagdeo and said, enough, no more. Here's my resignation. So we have precedent to ensure that ministers are removed. And in this case of Mr. Nandalal, I want to believe that, of course, it's retribution, because he cried wolf several years ago with a tape that had nothing on it that was criminal or in any way. And now he's confronted with his own tape. And I could tell you, people have called into Guyana and they're asking what is happening. One issue on his tape alone, ministers in other countries would have resigned on. But he has a plethora of issues. And I don't know why the government would seek to try to protect and cover him. It doesn't make sense. When you listen to his tape, all kinds of old offenses come into your mind. You know there's an offense of waiting to commit a felony? That's an offense in the law of the land. So I don't think the government is on good ground. I don't think the president is on good ground. And being the head of the bar and being the chief legal advisor for the government, I think that his authority has been eroded. And really, he's a lame duck. He's a lame duck attorney general. So I don't know why the president would want to continue with him in that position.
If I'm, just before we come off of this topic, if I'm to use an argument that apparently some journalists at NCN have been washed into using, and this is, look, the Attorney General was at the time having a relaxed conversation with an old friend, and the tape wasn't obtained legally and all of that. How would you comment on those sentiments?
Well, there are two issues. I mean, on the one hand, they're trying to bring in the fact that it was an illegality. That is, there was a breach of the law of the land. Mm-hmm. And on the other hand, we are looking at the contents of the tape. Okay. There are two separate issues. But let me say this. Any lawyer were to sort out to know that in Guyana, in our legal jurisprudence, any evidence which is relevant is admissible. It's not like in the United States. It means then our courts are not concerned with the manner in which evidence was obtained. Once the evidence reaches the court and the evidence is relevant, it would be admissible. In America, it's different. If you unlawfully obtain the evidence, the court won't admit it. But in the English system of jurisprudence, they don't care how the evidence reaches the courts. But once the evidence is before the court and the evidence is relevant, it will be accepted by the courts into evidence. So they have no ground. There are two separate issues. In other words, the illegality or the illegal manner in which the tape was obtained, and we don't know if that is a fact, that it was illegally obtained. Mm. That's a question for the DPP. Okay. But what we're concerned with, the illegality or purported illegality whatsoever does not taint the quality of the evidence that would go before the court. In other words, you're hearing all, for example, the intention to commit murder in Saffron Street. How is that irrelevant? Because you're having a friendly conversation? I know some old men were having a friendly conversation and they're spending time courtesy of the American government because they were talking about blowing up JFK and all those things. So I don't know, because they would have been wiretapped, carrying out a conversation in their living room, that the contents of their conversation would be irrelevant to the people of Guyana and to the people in the world. How else would you ferret out criminality? So there are two separate issues. One of the issues is it illegal? That would depend on the facts. What are the facts? Was there a third party who intervened or interposed themselves in the conversation between the two men? Because that's what you call an intercept, you know? So we don't know what the facts are. Perhaps that's why we're not hearing anything about whether it's illegal or not. And the other aspect of it, it doesn't matter. The illegality or whatever means, it doesn't contaminate it as evidence insofar as it's relevant. Once it's relevant, the court would accept it.
If the parliament is dissolved and APNU should win the next elections in the months to come, could we see that partnership, that government, bringing the full force of the law down on Mr. Nandlal if the PPP doesn't do anything?
We have always said in the APNU, and we will reiterate it today, that the law will take its course under any APNU government. There would be no sacred cows.
Okay, all right. Thank you, sir. Of course, viewers, you are tuned to Nation Watch. Of course, I'm here chatting with Mr. Basil Williams. Our phone lines are now opened. I'll give you a chance to dial those numbers. So we'll take a break and come back and start taking your calls and continue our discussion.
We need someone to take us to the start, lead us to a place nice and warm, yeah. Who's gonna clean up all this mess? 19 years of endless stress.
Granger, take over this government.
You can hear it east, north, south, and west. People calling for the best.
Granger, we want you as president.
Mr. Granger is the man to lead this nation, to bring a better future for this generation, for build better schools, better education, for bring back the reputation. Now we want a government that is trustworthy, provide employment and maintain security. Whether you're black, Indian, Amerindian, Chinese, a good life for all you Guyanese. We fed up of all the PPP.
Vote APN.
Caller, welcome. This is Nation Watch. Of course, you're free to pose your question.
First of all, Honorable Councillor,
Hello, good day.
good day. I must say this, you cannot remember me, I can certainly remember you. You are the first council that ever refer money in a matter that you had handled in the past. I never hear or heard about a council doing that except you.
That ever did what?
Refund money
Oh,
for handling a case.
okay.
I don't know if you could recall that though.
No, I can't recall that.
Okay,
I've been
okay. Now
practicing
concerning
something.
AG, phone call, etc., what went on with Mr. Lal and whatever, I fully agree with the government seeking outside help and so on, whatever. But by the same token, they should do the same thing to investigate the corruption that is going on under the present government. Now, relative to what you said concerning one-party rule, we've nearly had that under Mr. Bonham, so we're having the same thing, actually the same thing again. We all know who is responsible for Mr. Rodney death. I wouldn't go into that. But we are hoping that the APNU would form the next government. And when APNU form the next government, I do hope that APNU would pass legislation relative to have or adopt legislation for a coalition government. Because if we have that, you guys will have been there today to prevent lots of things, illegality and whatever that is going on. I do hope that you would agree with me. And I do hope that the government, the APNU government, would learn from the past performance of this government and do better. Thank you very much.
Thank you, caller.
Well, one of the valid points he's raised is the question of coalition. I think that we omitted in the constitutional reform exercise that we had some years ago to actually deal with that question. And what we have in the Constitution right now is provision for an upfront coalition.
Okay.
Whereas the desirable thing would have been to have the coalition after the results of the elections are determined. And if we, in fact, the call is correct, if in fact we had that provision in the Constitution, the AFC, APNU combination would have formed the government because they would have had a majority. So that's one of the things that we need to address in our Constitution. It's very important, and it in fact could provide the opportunity for regular changes in government because the population would be in a position to determine who they would want to be in government, and the results would reflect it. It's hard now, I think, based on the old racial paradigm that anybody could get a majority outright. So we seem to be in the era of coalition partnership governance. And so we need to let the Constitution reflect the ability to have coalitions after the results of the elections are known.
Before we go back to the phones, if I can piggyback on that, we've been seeing some reports in the past week, of course, that the Alliance for Change continues to refuse to collate with a Partnership for National Unity. In terms of your aim and your goal to achieve a government of national unity, how difficult is that making your work?
Well, let me say this. Our constitution has a provision that the person or the party whose candidate gets the highest vote, that person's presidential candidate would become the president, notwithstanding that they don't have the majority of the votes so as to command and control the parliament, as happens now. So, therefore, the challenge would be to have a list with a presidential candidate who could in fact get the majority of the votes at any elections under the present constitution. And I can't speak for the AFC. They have been consistent for several years now, for several elections. And I suppose only the AFC could really tell you the perils they see in having an upfront coalition with the APNU.
Okay. Caller, welcome.
Yes, a pleasant good afternoon, Mr. Williams.
Good afternoon.
Mr. Williams?
Yes, good afternoon.
There are two questions I need to ask. One, the APNU asking for the local government election, and at the same time, AFC asked for the no confidence motion. Question for you now: in which direction the combined opposition is heading? Because I'm a bit confused, wondering to know which direction APNU heading in and in which direction AFC headed in. That's the question for you, sir.
Thank you. I'm sorry for your confusion, but I was of the honest belief that the APNU has always been trying to get over its position in this regard and make its position clear, which is that we may basically running on dual tracks. And with this government, you know, you can't just put all your eggs in one basket. We recognize that if a date is named for local government elections, and at the same time we pass, confidence motion in the House, National Assembly, that there would obviously be a collision. The law is that where there's such a collision, the local government must yield to national elections. And in that regard, we don't see any conflict or contradiction. So let's look at what we were dealing with earlier, a couple months ago, a possible dissolution. If in fact local government elections are fixed for May, sometime in May, and the government is dissolved now, you're looking at national elections in or around February at most. Yep. And so there would be no conflict in local government elections coming up in May. So as far as the APNU position is, we don't see any conflict in what we have been doing. In fact, the AFC had a motion, and we have our track was the local government election. It's not something that we're speaking about today only. Since 2001, we were looking at local government elections. And even this year, the AFC signed on with us to have a specific date in August. I think it was 1st August.
Yes, it was 1st August.
That local government elections should be held by the 1st of August this year. They signed on, they agree with us. And in their list of demands to the president and the PPP, the government, they also had local government elections listed as number 5 on their list. So we don't know where the confusion is, and there's no conflict, in fact. So we could have both local government elections and both local government elections and general elections. If there's a situation where the local government elections are in collision with general and regional elections, the law is that local government elections must yield to the holding of general and regional elections. I hope I've made myself clear on behalf of the APNU.
Caller?
Yes, good afternoon to you and Mr. Basil Williams.
Good afternoon.
I have an observation, I have a question. To me, it seems as though...
Can you speak up for us, caller?
To me, it seems as though the PPP had wisdom and foresight
in not wanting to have coalition after elections, because during the time of constitutional reform, there should have been a provision in the Constitution to have coalition after elections, because it was so in 66, in 64, right? So why was it taken out of the Constitution now, right? Because in 64, the PNC and the UF form a coalition, or 63, PNC and UF form a coalition to form the government, right? But then suddenly now we have a constitution whereby you cannot form a coalition after the elections. But then the PPP, in their own wisdom, had anticipated that they cannot get the majority of electors every time, right? They know sometime down the road it would become like this. So therefore, that's why they argue to have it set, the constitution set in this way, right? The other thing is that I want to know if the PPP prorogue the parliament, who's going to authorize the spending of money? So if they prorogue it for 6 months, in March in March month, and this budget here, they can't spend any more money without the parliamentary authorization. So who is going to permit them to spend, and how will they continue running the government spending? Are we going to have a total dictatorship or what? Thank you.
Thank you, Paul.
Well, that's an excellent presentation. I think the second limb of his contention is correct. But the government doesn't need parliament to spend, because as I said earlier on this program, we disapproved spending, and yet the government continued to spend on those items that we disapproved. And if they did that when parliament was sitting, I mean, notwithstanding, we have motions to deal with the Minister of Finance pending in the Parliament. All that would go to on a prorogation. All of that would disappear. The slate would be wiped clean. You'll have to restart the process. But the point is, if they're spending when Parliament is alive, if they shut out Parliament, you're worried about whether they will continue to spend? You know, they would want to continue to spend, as we've said earlier. But they could only do certain things if they are allowed to do it. That's the point we're making to you.
Who is going to stop them from doing it if there's no parliament? That's the argument, I think, that's coming out, sir.
That's a point that we have made, that the government has to be careful about having angry Guyanese people.
Got you. Caller, welcome.
Oh yes, a very good morning to you. I want to first of all, the first point is to clarify a point made by the caller prior to my call, and in that he says that the Constitution, technically speaking, was made by the PPP. Now he's wrong. That Constitution which we have right now was made under the PNC. That's the first thing. The second thing is the opposition. The combined opposition is blowing hot and it's blowing cold, in the sense that there is no way, I cannot understand why Mr. Williams is going to come on public television indicating that you could have simultaneously the local government election and the general election. Perhaps he has his own take on that. Now the third point is this, is that the opposition has always gotten what they wanted. Now Mr. Ramotar has shown leadership. Let's go to the fight and let's fight the fight. You have a nice day. Bye-bye.
I think, Malika, you could answer that question
Yeah,
when I said that we could
Mr.
have
Williams said,
simultaneous.
I'll
allow you to answer that.
It.
No,
That
could
is
you
not
answer
what he
him,
said.
Malika?
What he's saying, viewers, is that whichever, if we have both, if APNU, not if, once APNU continues to call for local government elections and a decision is made in the parliament, whether it be to dissolve the house or whether the motion is allowed to debate and you eventually have to go to elections, obviously local government elections will have to yield to general elections.
If they are in collision.
Good. If they're in
with
collision.
In other words, if they are simultaneous, then the local government elections will have to yield to general and regional elections. And I think I said that several times just now.
Okay. All right, we'll take another call. All right, we can't accept that. Viewers, you know the rules. The volume of your
The thing
television
about the
set should be off.
Constitution, which he said that was made by the PNC, that Constitution was made in 1980, I think. And since then, you've had President Jagan, the late President Jagan, his wife, President Hines, President Jagdeo, President Ramotar, hugging up that Constitution and embracing it with alacrity. The point I made earlier was that they had an opportunity to address that issue in the Constitutional Reform Commission and process that they had. That coalition situation is tied up with this whole question of voting at the same elections for president. In other words, there are some other countries have separate elections for the executive president. In all countries, one elections which determine parliamentary representation and president and the presidential person. So that because of that, people would want to have a list and a slate that could get the majority of the votes to get the president. If they can't get it, they will not enter into any partnership or coalition. They'll try to do their best to see if they could get the presidency. And so the point we're making is that you need to have provision subsequent to the election for that coalition. It means that that position with respect to the presidency, get the person who wins the majority of the votes getting the presidency, would also have to be altered. You follow what I'm saying? What's the sense you having a coalition afterwards and that provision still remains where the president, the list with the highest votes gets the president? So you needed a complete revamp of that provision to usher in this whole question of coalition being formed after the results of the elections come out. So they are intertwined. You can't have a coalition after the elections and still have the president coming up front on a list with the highest votes. Otherwise, it's a waste of time because the president is the one under the Constitution who is empowered to appoint the prime minister and ministers and to appoint the cabinet. So any coalition afterwards without changing that provision would be senseless.
Okay. Caller, welcome.
Yes, good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Can you speak up for us, please?
The election before they combined PNC.
We're not hearing you, caller.
The election before the PANU and PNC did win it with all the dead names that they put on the list. Because you could remember seeing the machine.
Caller, you have
We're
to
not
speak
hearing
up
him.
for us because we need the viewers to hear you so that Mr. Williams can respond accurately.
Good. The PNU and the PNC.
APNU,
They combined, right? Win the election the last time with a lot of dead names they put on there. When we see the machine spinning slowly, we want to know what happened. But not knowing the wickedness that was going on with. But right now we're glad for change in this country. Because look at the country condition. Look what is going on. Children going to school, and if you see the bar where they have there, 2 tennis rolls and little sugar water and all kind of thing going on. And look the condition of Guyana. It's nice. We need a change. We need a change. And we know Brigadier Granger is going to make it. We know that he's going to make it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, caller. And on that note, even before Mr. Williams comments, if he wants to comment on that, you know, I keep urging our population, our society. It's one thing to say that, yes, you're a David Granger supporter, you're an APN, you support, you're a PNC supporter. It's one thing to sit at home and say that, yes, we're going to win the next elections. You want the opposition to go into government so that we can have a better life. But viewers and citizens, that can only happen if you play your part. I keep saying that the opposition alone cannot do it. You have to play your part in terms of getting registered, in terms of getting your families involved, and in terms of speaking out against the atrocities of the government. So you have a lot to do. Caller, are you there?
No, you must tell him
Yes.
how many people didn't vote.
That too.
In
You,
many
you know, you
regions
have
of
to
this
get
country.
registered. Caller, go ahead.
I think the caller, the the caller wasn't listening to what I was saying. I was saying that they had constitutional reform, and the PPP in the wisdom had not seek to change that system in the constitution, whereby the priority form get the presidency, because they know in their wisdom that they, at no time at all, they could never ever continue to get the majority of votes, right? So but they know that the people who supports them, right, is in the priority, and they would always unbendingly support them. So that's why they opt to keep that provision in the Constitution, right? The other thing is that this caller seems to be not listening to is that Mr. Williams said that about the local government election and national election, right? One would supersede the other, right? And he's still saying that Mr. Williams had said that the local government election could come at the same time with the national election, right? So that caller is out to confuse, right, and mislead people. Thank you.
Thank you very much, caller. Since the caller said that, Mr. Wilson, maybe we only have about 5 more minutes left in our 5 or 6 minutes left in our broadcast today. The caller, even said that he sees Mr. Ramotar's move as him taking some sort of leadership. And I know a Partnership for National Unity has been saying for a while now that Mr. Ramotar lacks proper leadership. Do you see this addressed to the nation and this kind of, if you want to call it, decision making? Do you see it as him taking control and being a leader, a strong leader, all of a sudden?
I don't know. I can't make that conclusion. What I believe is he sounded as a man who was thrown a lifeline on this question of a prorogation. And so he felt bold enough to come out and make his threat to our passing, if he were to pass or attempt, not pass, if he were to attempt to initiate the process of embarking on a debate of the motion to pass it, then we can expect that he would not allow that debate to be completed, and he would then in fact intervene with his proclamation for prorogation or dissolution. Because I don't know if the president in his right mind could rule out a dissolution. I think people are looking forward to an election. And I don't know if he's bold enough to really arrest the type of enthusiasm that the people have for national election at this time.
Just for the purpose of general knowledge, if he is to either prorogue or dissolve the parliament, how does that work? Would a message be sent from him via the Prime Minister?
Yes, he has to do a proclamation. It has to be gazetted before it could take legal effect. And so they probably will have those preparations afoot. I don't have to tell them their business.
Okay.
But we are going to go to Parliament with our avowed stated intention to proceed with the no confidence motion. And he can make good his threat or not. We also have deliberated on the post-threat situation and a post-prorogation situation. And I'm not at liberty to disclose on a matter, but we have always been proactive in many measures in dealing with this government. And so the population can rest assured that we in the APNU, certainly, and along with the AFC, we have these issues in hand, and we prepared for any eventuality.
All right, we'll take this final call and then we'll have to go. Caller, welcome.
Hi, good night.
Afternoon.
And Mr. Basil Williams. Good afternoon to you, sir. Now, I got a major problem with the politician and the legal minds. I feel for some reason the politicians of today and the legal minds in this country really feel that the citizens of this country are so dumb that they don't understand the laws, the flaws, and the clause in this land. I cannot see two poles, a man who lamp and two cowtail and say guy and no destiny. Two cowtail can't carry upon one destiny, going to kill him. If we are we is a combined opposition. A combined opposition means is that these people have to get together before they get authority as opposition. And I can't understand you talking about me and me talking about you and what the PNC going to do, or what the FNI going to do, or what the AFC going to do. I'm tired of this illusion and this trash. We got to come together. If you're going to kill King Kong, you can't go with a lasso and say that when I throw the lasso, you go run into King Kong. We all got to tie King Kong. This is the only way we could kill King Kong. And this was going on there, to my very concern, somebody making us a fool. It happened when the previous former opposition leader, Mr. Robert Corbyn, when they was to invite Mr. Sharma and the other opposition into Parliament to meet with Mr. Jagdeo, he alone went and locked up in a room with Mr. Jagdeo. What they discussed, only God knows. Subsequently, he ain't got time with the people. Now we see people deceiving us all the time, all the time, all the time, all the time. It's time we stop taking deceit, brother. We got to stick together. We got to look for your brother. This is what the God say. A man without vision, the nation perish. And this we see. Now, for the last thing, I want you as a legal mind to tell this public, is it lawful? You could recall, I think yourself and the commissioner had a conversation, somebody where they had a record and said that it was illegal. I want to know if it is legal for legal mind to call anybody and verbally abuse them. And then you're going to tell people that it was a discussion. If there was a discussion, the brother need to go along to how to discuss. Because I can't see ordinary man tell his wife, man, you ain't done me food, I won't give one box and I'm going to tell you about Lilias and all, and then the court send you in jail for 6 months and all, and take $40,000. We need this lawlessness to stop.
Thank you, caller. Sorry, you had to disconnect that call. And I think you probably missed where Mr. Williams
we dealt with that issue substantially, but I like the illustration he gave just now, because that was something that domestic violence takes place in the home, and it certainly is certainly dealt with harshly in the courts. So we're making a proper point there, that notwithstanding that it is a private conversation or something that occurs within your living room, if in fact it is speaking to sedition and speaking to rebellion and revolution, and it comes to the knowledge of the public, then I certainly would tell you the public can act on it, the state can act on it, and the government can act on it.
Okay. All right. Mr. Williams, in the final 30 seconds before we definitely have to go. Again, what can citizens, and we're talking right now, this period we're talking about APNU, what can citizens look forward to in terms of a partnership for national unity with whatever it is that you can do regarding tomorrow's sitting of the National Assembly?
Well, look, a partnership for national unity has stated it would support the AFC's motion. We are not in the business of making agreements, giving assurances, and then resilient from them. So the nation would expect that if the motion comes up tomorrow for debate, APNU will support that motion. And that's our stated position. If the government intervenes before, and they either dissolve or prorogue, then we already have we have already had deliberations and discussions on that scenario, and that scenario would evolve. We are inviting persons to keep their attention undividedly on the Parliament tomorrow. If you wish to come up, you could come up, but just follow the issues so that you couldn't be fooled. Because even on this program, I have made a clear statement, and a caller then calls in to say that I said something differently.
Exactly.
So if they could do it on a program like this, when I'm seated here, you could expect the kind of propaganda that they would want to dish out, when they have their media, the state media grinding. So you have to be paying keen attention to your business from now on.
Exactly.
After tomorrow.
Thank you very much, sir. Of course, and I just like to add to those
And
sentiments.
APNU will provide that leadership for the Guyanese people.
Exactly. Viewers,
in any scenario.
Please be alert and be careful. I know we have no choice. We have to look at the state media because we have to listen to what is it that they're saying in terms of the propaganda that they're pushing. But remember, when you're listening doesn't mean you're listening and you're hearing, but it doesn't mean that you actually believe it. I am Malika Ramsey. Thank you very much for joining us. Be good Guyanese citizens. Take care of yourselves. Take care of each other. Again, thank you very much to Basil Williams, who is the Deputy Speaker, Chairman of the People's National Congress Reform, and Shadow Minister of Legal Affairs, and of course, Shadow Attorney General. Take care, Guyana.
I think it was a good program. You might be the bastard kind of back for saying he said something different, eh?
But he sleep.